From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And coming up today, K-State's Jane Lingenfelser joins us to talk about the top-performing hybrids in K-State's 2019 Grain Sorghum Performance Test. The results of the statewide field trials have just been released. Also today, K-State's Gregg Ibendahl will have a look at his new analysis of the farm debt situation using Kansas Farm Management Association data to identify trends in the extent of debt incurred by farmers currently. The findings tell him that you producers need to be evaluating your debt status very carefully right now. And K-State's Charlie Lee later on discussing a new study of how or whether bobwhite quail protect their nests from predators. It's all here on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Thanks for tuning in. This is the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Several days back, you'll remember that we had our guest now in to review the 2019 K-State Corn Hybrid Performance Trials. Well, of course, K-State conducts the same exercise, if you will, in evaluating grain sorghum hybrids in the state. And those results have also been compiled and are ready for you producers to review as you go about your grain sorghum hybrid selections for 2020 production. Once more, Mike's side is Jane Lingenfelser. Jane is the agronomist in charge of K-State's crop performance tests. And the results are out there, and producers can make full use of them at this point, Jane.
They can. The results can be found on our website at agronomy.ksu.edu/services/crop-performance-tests. And the annual publication will be coming out as an insert in the High Plains Journal magazine later in January. And it will be in local extension offices soon after that, or it can be ordered by calling the KSRE bookstore. That number is 785-532-1150. Also, an electronic copy will be available at the KSRE website. That address is ksre.ksu.edu/bookstore/crops.
As for the growing conditions in which the tests were conducted, well, hardly ideal, Jane. There was ample moisture, that's for sure, but getting that crop in the bin timely was the issue at hand.
That's right. And while the corn crop was essentially about rainfall this year, the sorghum crop was really more about duration. There was a definite sense that the 2019 sorghum crop had really great potential, but it just wasn't allowed to finish this year. Starting out, wet soils in the spring delayed planting in specific locations, but overall, the planting around the state was only slightly delayed from previous years. The early growth was inhibited by the wet soils, resulting in less root growth, leaf expansion, and root compaction and yellow leaves because of the excess moisture. The best place in Kansas to grow sorghum this year was the Tribune area in the West Central Production Division. Tribune enjoyed the most favorable moisture distribution this year, and the crops in this area express close to maximum yields. And Mary Knapp, again, has provided cumulative precipitation graphs for all the locations in the performance test, so you can see yourself how your area did.
The temperatures were fairly mild as summer readings go. No real heat waves to stress this crop.
No, warm temperatures weren't much of a factor this year. The warmest readings were seen in mid-July, with the highest read of 108 in Rush County. More of the concern this year were the freezes. The autumn freezes did occur about the typical time, with Colby dropping to 32 degrees on October 10th and Columbus reaching 27 degrees on October 31st. However, this year, so much of the sorghum's resources were put into vegetative growth, and for the most part, it didn't have the post-flowering drought stress that would trigger senescence. So when the cold temperatures began, those enzymes just stopped, and the plant didn't have enough time or resources for grain filling. Large parts of Kansas reported low test weights and poor quality because of this stop in production, were discounted or refused at the elevator because of the potential for reduced feed value.
There was no doubt those cold temperatures for October were limiting factors for the maturity of this crop, but the yields didn't drop off the table terribly from the previous year.
They really didn't. According to the USDA, the 2019 estimate for the sorghum crop was 86 bushels per acre for the state, which is only down 2 bushels from last year.
Jane, you have here, again, a summary, region by region, of those hybrids which tend to rise to the top of the tests at the various locations.
I'll mention a few hybrids that in each region that did well, and this is by no means an exhaustive list because I'll only mention those that did well across multiple locations within a region. There were undoubtedly hybrids that were higher yielding in the individual locations. The complete results can be found again at agronomy.ksu.edu/services/crop-performance-tests. And I'd like to thank Pioneer and Monsanto for again providing our maturity check hybrids this year.
Well, we'll begin once again with the dryland tests in the northeast part of the state. Originally at 3 sites, but you had to pull one back.
We did. We had Manhattan in Riley County. Belleville in Republic County was ultimately abandoned due to heavy weed pressure and lack of uniformity. And we also had Beloit in Mitchell County. And the average yield for the northeast dryland region was 111 bushels. And hybrids that did well in this environment, Advanta ADV XG256 did well. Also DeKalb DKS 5407, Golden Acres 4880R, and Polanski 5719 did well in the northeast dryland region.
And your counterpart tests in the southeast part of the state then?
In the southeast, we had Ottawa in Franklin County, Parsons in Lebec County. I didn't mention in the introduction, but this area received an excess of 30 extra inches during the growing season. However, our sorghum prevailed at these sites, left us with an average of 110 bushels per acre. And hybrids that did well in this very saturated condition, Advanta ADV XG885, also Alta ADV G2275, Dynagrow XGX19981, KSU MN05 did well, and our medium maturity check from DeKalb did well in the southeast region.
Central Kansas tests then. There were 2, and then there were 1. You had to give up on 1 toward the north-central part of that region.
Yes, we had Asteria in Saline County and Hutchinson in Reno County. We had to give up on our test in Asteria. It was planted and then later replanted with heavy rains immediately afterwards. But at our Hutchinson site, we had an average of 143 bushels per acre. And hybrids that did well in Hutchinson, Alta AG1203, DeKalb DKS 5353, Dynagrow GX19981, KSU MN05, S&W Seed CHR0395 did well, and Sorghum Partners SP7715 did well in the central region.
Well then, Jane, taking it to the western part of the state, the dryland trials, at 4 sites, and all 4 of them apparently came through.
They did. Not all that particularly well. Our average across Hayes, Colby, Tribune, and Garden City was 92 bushel, which is fairly short of the yield potential at this environment. But hybrids that did well, Advanta ADV XG255, DeKalb DKS 3816, Dynagrow GX17973, and M60GB31, both from Dynagrow, did well. Also Galen Ward 18092, and Sorghum Partners SP68M57 did well in the Western Dryland Test.
And irrigated grain sorghum trials, 4 locations, one in south central Kansas, the other 3 toward the western part of the state, one of which you had to abandon, you say, but those irrigation systems didn't have to run all that much at any of the 4, did they?
Not at all. We did, as you say, have to abandon the test at Garden City in Finney County because of a very strong windstorm in late August before harvest. But we were left with Hutchinson in Reno County, Colby in Thomas County, and Tribune in Greeley County. The average of these irrigated sites was 113 bushels. And hybrids that did well, Advanta ADV XG224, DeKalb DKS 5353, Golden Acres 2840B, KSU MN05, S&W Seed CHR 2042, and Sorghum Partners SP74M21 did well in the irrigated sites this year.
Well, those were the hybrids that tended to stand out at each of the regions and locations that comprised the tests this year on the part of Kansas State University. You've, again, only mentioned some of the information, though, here, Jane. You want producers to take full advantage of the entire report, study it, and let that information help them make their decisions on hybrid selection.
Absolutely. I would encourage all sorghum producers to research hybrids of interest and see how they did in tests that are closest to their own management and growing conditions. Our personal results are available online at agronomy.ksu.edu, and printed copies of the 2019 Kansas Performance Test with Grain Sorghum Hybrids will be available as an insert in the High Plains Journal magazine and will be in local extension offices after that.
All right, so growers seek that full information out. And Jane, once again, hats off to you and those who help you out in gathering this information every year. We appreciate the overview and your time. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
That from Jane Lingenfelser, the agronomist in charge of K-State's crop performance tests. A quick summary of the 2019 Grain Sorghum Performance Trials conducted by the university. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll be back on the K-State Radio Network. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. You're listening to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. A conversational matter right now in agriculture, the state of farm debt. Now, you've heard a lot of chatter about that in recent weeks and months. What is that actual state? It's a hard question to get at, but our guest has taken a shot at that very matter through an analysis he just completed. Gregg Ibendahl has returned once again to visit with us, a research and extension agricultural economist here at K-State. And you've been party to a lot of that talk too, Gregg, about the debt structure out there and how much debt producers are in. What's your general viewpoint on that right now before we talk about the analysis proper?
Well, it's almost like a tale of two stories, basically, because on one hand, you hear stories that, farmers are really in a bad debt situation. They're really struggling with debt. But then the other side of the coin is you look at what the overall debt-to-asset ratio, which is one of our common measures, to look at how much debt farmers have. And that ratio looks really good. I mean, it's about as low as it's ever been. So it's kind of two competing stories going on out there right at the moment.
We'll expand on the debt-to-asset ratio in just a second. But the trend you note in your article going over this analysis is that over the last 2 decades, we have seen farm debt easing to the upside, right?
Yeah, I mean, so if we go back to the early 80s, late 70s, when we kind of had the first farm crisis, you notice back then there was a trend of farmers had taken on a lot more debt, and then we had the farm crisis where farmers kind of struggled, and then the debt levels dropped way low, I think as a factor of the, farmers weren't able to borrow a whole lot of money even they wanted to. So debt levels dropped way, way off. But ever since then, since about, maybe like the late 80s, early 90s, we've kind of seen a slow but steady increase in the level of debt. So if you just look at things on a absolute number, really our amount of debt that we have now in the U.S. farm economy is probably as high as it ever has been.
And this is going by USDA Economic Research Service data, but the purpose of your analysis was to further assess this level of debt held by farmers?
Well, kind of just look at to see if all farmers kind of fit in that situation. So we notice, again, we look at our KFMA numbers from the state of Kansas. We've seen our farmers kind of mirror the overall U.S. average, where if you just look at averages, our farmers have taken on more debt, but probably not at a rate any faster than what the U.S. farmers have done. Their debt-to-asset ratios here in Kansas are as probably low as they ever have been, just like the U.S. So what I really wanted to do in this analysis was really kind of look at more at what's been happening at the margins and just to see if all farmers are really what is a good situation as what the averages or the median may imply.
Now, when you say at the margins, on the extremes, on the ends of the average, if you will, right?
Yeah, because we know the median and our average is just kind of all of everybody grouped together, but certainly all farmers wouldn't fit in that situation. So those farmers who have a whole lot of debt or very little debt, those farmers' situation could be a lot different than what the average shows.
So you utilized information from the Kansas Farm Management Association data set here, and you looked at those margins. One thing you say you found was percentage of farms that have no debt has actually increased.
Yeah, so what I did in the analysis was to kind of make a fair comparison. I basically took all the farms over the last 10 years that have been in the system every year. So that way we don't have farms jumping in or out that kind of maybe could distort what was happening. So the numbers I look at is really a panel data set. We actually have about 470-some farms that actually have been in there for all 10 years that I used in my analysis. And if you look at our numbers, basically from 2009 to 2018, which is the last 10 years that we have data for, we actually have increased slightly the number of farms that basically have no debt. We basically went up from about, just under 20% up to about 25%. So that's really good. So we have, we actually increased a quarter of our farms really have no debt here in Kansas.
And to what is that attributed? Do you have any thoughts?
Well, so part of it, I think, would be the fact that since this is a panel data set and we're looking at the same farms, we're obviously seeing a 10-year age in these farmers. So as you might expect, life cycle theory would say that, as farmers get older, they kind of want to pay down their debt level. So that's some of the stuff that we're seeing is that those farmers actually have paid down their debt level, and we get more farmers basically with no debt. So that doesn't really surprise me a whole lot.
It's the other end of the spectrum that really has grabbed your attention, though, you say, Greg, and that is those farms that are carrying a quite heavy debt load. And you set a benchmark here for comparison of $1 million in debt, right?
Yeah, I kind of did basically a frequency distribution and then a cumulative distribution, but they really both show the same thing. So it kind of shows you actually what kind of buckets we could put these farmers in based on their debt level. So in my frequency distribution, I basically have $100,000 buckets for each of my categories. But when I get to the $1 million category, it's basically $1 million and up here. And that's the category size that really kind of concerns me, because back in 2009, we had about 8% of our farms that basically had over $1 million worth of debt. I mean, that may seem large, but I guess, when you're talking about a farm with, 2,500 acres, that may not be quite such a big deal. But what's really concerning, though, is the percent of farms that actually have that level of debt now. So we went from basically 8% that had $1 million, and now we're up to about 20%. So 1 in 5 farmers here in our Kansas Farm Management Database have over $1 million of debt.
And that is troublesome because of the potential for that turning the wrong direction?
Well, yes. I mean, with interest rates, kind of fairly low right now. I mean, servicing that amount of debt, I don't think is a problem. But certainly, if interest rates would turn and we would start to see some increases in interest rates, servicing $1 million of debt, that's not pocket change for most farmers. Even farmers with 3,000 acres, that's still a pretty significant level of debt. So that servicing that going forward could be a problem. And just the fact, that largest category of levels of debt, the fact that one category has jumped up so high, to me is concerning. I think we're getting a lot of farmers who've been struggling to have adequate net farm income that have actually, to get around that and meet cash flow needs, they've taken on more debt.
I want to circle back to, Greg, the debt-to-asset ratio then. That has been widely used as a barometer of the solvency of farms. But what you're saying here in your article is that could be artificially skewed in a way by the fact that land values in particular have remained firm.
Yeah, from my analysis, looking at some of the stuff back in the first farm crisis, is really the debt-to-asset ratio is really a trailing indicator. So, I mean, things will look really good even while you're in the midst of a farm crisis, and it doesn't really start to look bad until you're really kind of been in the midst of it. And we see a lot of farmers being in bad financial shape, and we saw that happen in the early 80s here. So the debt-to-asset ratio basically consists of two parts. It consists of the amount of debt you have, which has been going up, but the other side driving that is the asset side. So if your asset values, like land values, have been going up faster than what your debt has, then your debt-to-asset ratio is going to look really good. And based on the 10-year history I have of the data, back from the 2009, that was kind of the start of when we were in a really good picture for farm prices. We saw some significant increases in land values. So during that early part of the time, we saw a big jump in land values, which has really helped the debt-to-asset ratio go down. But still, that just really hides the fact that really farmers have taken on a lot more debt, too.
And if that asset side crashes, then trouble ensues.
Yeah, that's really what happened during the first farm crisis. Things were looking, that really farmers' debt-to-asset ratios going into that looked really good, but what happened was the asset side really fell off the cliff, and suddenly the debt-to-asset ratios now start to look really bad. So imagine what would happen in Kansas now with farmers who have seen a growth in asset values that would help out their debt-to-asset ratios. If the same thing would happen and we would see a crash in land values, then we're going to see really high debt-to-asset ratios just like we saw during the 1980 farm crisis.
And quickly, it would seem.
I think
potentially
that could happen really quick, I think.
Right. So the take-home for producers to step back and get an actual handle on where their debt structure lies, and then if it is on the worrisome side, what actions can they take?
Well, I think that's one of the issues farmers need to watch out for, because I think it's really easy to run up your level of debt and not really realize it's really happening. I mean, you just take on bigger lines of credit and maybe run up some credit card debt and buy some new machinery on credit. I think it's pretty easy for farmers to run up a debt level and not really realize that's really happening like that. It's not like they're taking out loans all the time directly from a bank, that kind of thing here. So farmers need to keep a handle on how much debt they're having, not look at their debt-to-asset ratio. And again, we go back to the case where we got 4 years probably of not very good net farm income. So, farmers kind of really need to as much as they can, match up their family living with the amount of cash they have coming in. And obviously, whenever you have family living exceeding what you're bringing in for income altogether on your farm, something's got to give somewhere. And then in most cases, that's an increase in the debt level.
And such things as more conservative borrowing and perhaps parting with assets that are carrying a heavy load and not carrying their own weight, so to speak?
Yeah, so things like buying land, you may want to look at, well, even if it might be a good deal, maybe you should just go ahead and rent it instead of buying it, because that would certainly help on the cash flow. The same thing with more machinery. I mean, whenever you buy more machinery, there's a potential to add more debt right there. So, things like watching what you spend for new machinery, maybe using more custom operations if you can, instead of buying a new combine, for instance. And again, with buying anything, buying land, buying equipment, just watch what you're spending out there.
But mainly being fully aware of your debt load at the moment.
Yeah, I think farmers, I think the worst thing they can do is not keep track of that and have your lender tell you that you got too much debt borrowed. Farmers need to keep a handle on that, keep an idea of what their debt situation looks like and how much they're adding, and really stay on top of that.
Again, this is all captured in an article that Gregg has put together covering the analysis on the changing farm debt situation, and it's drawing from Kansas Farm Management Association data. Gives a real good idea of what may well be happening out there. Have a look at that article. Good read at agmanager.info. And we appreciate the input and the work here, Gregg, as always.
All right, thanks.
Thanks to you. That from agricultural economist, K-State Research and Extension, Gregg Ibendahl, agmanager.info, for further information on this highly important topic to all agricultural producers. Agriculture Today will be back after these moments away. This is the K-State Radio Network.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
Welcome back to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. For you now, today's agricultural news headlines, these courtesy in part of DTN. The U.S. Senate Finance Committee is setting the stage for action on the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement in the chamber. The panel will hold its mock markup today. The timing of the vote in the full Senate, however, may now come sooner than previously expected. The House, so far, has delayed sending its articles of impeachment to the Senate, delaying when that trial in the Senate can begin. Back in December, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said that the USMCA action in the upper chamber would await the completion of the impeachment process. But as the delay continues relative to impeachment, it ups the odds that the full Senate could act on USMCA before the impeachment trial. Groups of drones have been spotted buzzing over rural parts of northwest Kansas, northeastern Colorado, and western Nebraska for weeks now, unnerving residents. Now, U.S. officials are working with state and local authorities to determine who's behind the mysterious nighttime flights. Morgan County, Colorado Sheriff David Martin hosted a closed-door meeting with law enforcement agencies and government officials yesterday to talk about the recent sightings. The drones reportedly have 6-foot wingspans and fly in grid-like patterns hundreds of feet in the air in groups of 6 to 10. The Federal Aviation Administration, the Drug Enforcement Administration, the Air Force, and the U.S. Army Forces Command have said they don't have information about the aircraft. Multiple FAA divisions are working closely with federal, state, and local stakeholders to try to determine whether the reported sightings in Colorado, Kansas, and Nebraska are drones, and if so, who's operating them and for what reason. Now, the FAA said it has contacted drone test site operators and drone companies, but has not determined if they were behind the flights. The agency has also been in touch with several airports in the area, warning pilots to be cautious and asking them to report any sightings. Sheriff's officials say it appears no laws are being broken. Drone pilots are not required to file flight plans unless they're in controlled airspace, such as near an airport. Well, a name very familiar in the Kansas beef cattle industry and a frequent guest over the years on this broadcast. Dan Thompson has been named the new chair of the Department of Animal Science at Iowa State University. Dan's been serving as the Jones Professor of Production Medicine and Epidemiology at K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine. He's been a KSU faculty member for 15 years. Now, Dan will begin his new duties on April the 6th. He is a native of Clearfield, Iowa, and Dan hosts the national animal health television show Doc Talk, as you may know. His leadership positions in the industry include chairing the National Cattlemen's Beef Association's Animal Welfare Committee, serving as the global co-leader for McDonald's Beef Health and Welfare Committee, and serving on the Tyson Fresh Meats Animal Welfare Advisory Board likewise. Again, K-State's Dan Thompson is now the new chair as of April the 6th of the Department of Animal Science at Iowa State University. We wish Dan all the best in this new undertaking. K-State's Corn Management School Series is underway for 2020, with a couple of those coming up right away. Now, producers, these schools will cover a number of issues facing you in each region, including farm bill options, weed control, insect resistance, corn fertility management, disease management, and late planting season considerations. There are 2 of these yet on this week's calendar. One is tomorrow, the 8th of January, in Parsons, and then on Friday, the 10th, in Wichita. It's not too late to take part in those. You need to contact the Labette or the Sedgwick County Extension offices right away, or you can register at kscorn.com/cornschool. That's kscorn.com/cornschool. Now, this week's edition of Milk Lines with K-State dairy specialist Mike Brook. Mike?
Today, I want to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers concerning calves that are on your farm this morning and maybe how you're trying to feed them. With already the cold weather that we've received, we need to start thinking about how we're feeding our calves. And for those of you that are already on an accelerated feeding program where you're feeding more than 2 quarts of liquid feed twice a day, this may not be as much of a concern. But for those of you that are still following a traditional liquid feeding program for your calves and you're only feeding 2 quarts of either waste milk or milk replacer morning and evening, probably need to think about some things. First order of business, whether we're on an accelerated feeding program or not, is that we make sure that we have a clean, dry place for those animals to rest. It also needs to be draft-free. I think the bedding of choice here is really straw. Not sure that there's really anything that works as well as straw. And we need to have a deep bed. Basically, when the calf is in the bed, they probably need to have about 60% of their body that is actually touching the straw. This will help insulate them. Keep in mind that for these young calves, when it gets below 70 degrees Fahrenheit, they're in a situation where they're needing to balance the heat that they're losing against the heat that they're producing. In other words, they're in a situation where they may become stressed. So provide them with a good bed to lay in. We also need to think about how we're feeding them. As we drop below 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and again, this would be for traditional feeding, we need to increase the amount of liquid feed they receive by about 10% each day. For each 10-degree drop we have below 30. Keeping in mind that if we drop down to zero, we need to be feeding about 30% more liquid feed each day just to help them maintain body temperature. We could also consider feeding them warm water, maybe at over the noon hour, instead of a liquid feeding, or put in a liquid feeding during that time. Speaking of water, it's also important that we remember that even in freezing weather, they still need additional water in addition to the liquid feed that you're feeding. This will help prevent dehydration. And as we think about dehydration, any animal that becomes sick may become dehydrated quicker in this type of weather. So as a result of that, we need to make sure that we're keeping up on animals that are sick and in a treatment program, making sure that they stay hydrated. If they do not stay hydrated, our treatment programs will generally not be as effective. As we think about all the things that we need to do, and I know in colder weather it's hard to find additional hours in the day, but it is really important that you pay some additional attention to your calves. Paying some attention to the feeding issues that you might have on the farm, feeding extra feed, keeping these animals in a clean, dry, and draft-free area will help them survive the stresses of cold stress. This is Mike Brook with K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Mike. And this is Agriculture Today.
With the shortage of primary care positions, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State Research and Extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Agriculture Today concludes once again with a visit featuring Charlie Lee, wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Well, Charlie, you've quite a bit of information to pass along today on predation activities on quail nests, and this has largely been thought to contribute heavily to the drop-off in quail numbers.
This is the time of year when many land managers are concerned about game bird numbers. Populations of northern bobwhite quail have declined in most locations in the United States. Fortunately, we have some locations in Kansas that still have great quail populations, but we have a lot of other locations where people are not satisfied with the quail numbers and are always looking for better options. And as they discuss with other hunters and managers, the question usually becomes, what can we do about the predators? And do predators really impact bobwhite quail populations? And the data is very clear that annual survival rates for bobwhite quail is fairly low. When you think of about an animal that is as small as a newly hatched bobwhite quail, they're prey for most anything. But there's also tremendous amount of quail that are lost prior to hatching by nest predators. And those nest predators can include a wide array of mammalian species, but primarily would be skunks and raccoons, opossums, some fox and coyote activity. In some locations, you would have feral hogs, armadillos. But also, when you look at the avian predators, there's species there that specialize in preying on birds, so they were going to take some quail as well. But those survival rates are somewhere in the 5 to 30% range. So from that data, you can see that predators are certainly very important in the survival of bobwhite quail.
Is the lack of protective habitat part of the question here?
Well, it certainly is the standard answer when you ask a biologist about how they can improve quail numbers. It comes down to habitat, and that's sort of the indirect answer. Habitat management can mitigate some of the highs and lows, but keep in mind, because of their relatively small size and passive-type behavior, a lot of things prey on quail, and although quail have adapted to cope with some of those predation rates by factors like renesting and having large clutches, predators can still have significant impact on quail numbers.
There was, you tell us, a study recently conducted in the southeastern part of the U.S., and this wanted to find out whether quail fight back, to put it that way, what sort of defenses they put up to protect their nests. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this was a study that looked at predators at nests of northern bobwhites. It was done in Florida and the southern part of Georgia. They put video cameras on 790 bobwhite quail nests and examined predation events, which occurred at 242 of those nests. So you can see a pretty high percentage of those nests were preyed on. The objective of the study was to evaluate the role of predator identity and parental investment in decisions to engage the predator or be completely passive. So they took the 242 images or videos and tried to determine, did the quail act differently depending upon what species was predating the nest, and if so, was it fight or flight, and did that parental decision make a difference on what species was involved?
And you say, in fact, it did, that the species attacking those nests may be reacted to differently by quail.
Yeah, of the 242 predation events, the parents exhibited active defense at only 23% of those. So of those, the bobwhites engaged in nest defense behaviors against snakes, against armadillos, fire ants, cotton rats, and fox squirrels. Those are all some of the smaller predators out there. They did not observe any nest defense behavior towards raccoons, opossums, bobcats, coyotes. So you can see that some of those species that are more likely to prey on adults as well as the nest, the quail had a different response. The types of defenses that quail would exhibit included things like broken wing displays or combinations of a direct attack at the predator or posturing. Those were some of the main ways that quail would defend. They determined that the broken wing displays, posturing, and pacing were used at about 37% of the defended nests, and sometimes direct attacks against the predator also occurred, but not frequently.
So how can this information be helpful in trying to conserve quail through predation management, or can it be?
Well, I think it shows the importance of some of the natural defenses that quail have in ways that they try to mitigate low populations. The ability to renest, the ability to either parent to incubate the eggs is certainly important. The large clutch size are certainly important. And I think those are some of the things that producers and land managers need to focus on in order to try to build quail numbers. Habitat is certainly important, and if we try to build the things into the environment that quail need to mitigate predators, I think we're going to have a much better outcome. We've always talked that habitat is important. I think this particular study shows that, yes, quail are heavily preyed upon. There's probably not a lot you're going to do as far as teaching quail to defend their nest, but it's a good approach to showing people how important predators are with quail. And one of the best techniques that we have is trying to develop the habitat so that quail have a much better chance at surviving because the habitat conditions are excellent.
Very good. Charlie, we appreciate this additional look at the influence of predation on quail numbers in the wild. That's from Charlie Lee, wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Our time's away for today. Thanks, as always, for tuning in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.